A vast, silent city rests within a sheer canyon wall. Its stone towers stand empty against the sky, a haunting monument to a people who simply walked away. This is the enduring mystery of the Anasazi, a remarkably advanced culture that thrived in the American Southwest for centuries, only to completely abandon their breathtaking cliff dwellings around the year 1300. By the end of our investigation, you will understand the perfect storm of events that led to one of history's most puzzling disappearances. We will uncover why a society capable of building architectural marvels would choose to leave them all behind, and what chilling evidence of conflict was left in their wake. What does the fate of a long-lost civilization tell you about our own world today? The very term Anasazi is a word steeped in another culture's perspective. It comes from the Navajo language, and its common translation, ancient enemy, reveals a complex history of neighboring peoples. Today, many descendants from modern Pueblo tribes prefer the name Ancestral Puebloans, honoring their direct lineage to these ancient architects. Their story does not begin with towering stone cities, but much earlier, over 2,000 years before the Common Era, with a humble and ingenious people known as the basket makers. For generations, these early ancestors were nomadic, skilled at weaving intricate baskets so tight they could hold water. They were hunters and gatherers, moving with the seasons. But then, a revolution took root quite literally with the arrival of maize from Mesoamerica. This was not the sweet corn we know today, but a hardy, durable grain that could be dried and stored. The basket makers learned to cultivate it in the arid soil, a feat of incredible perseverance. They were not just planting seeds, they were planting the future. Soon, beans and squash joined their fields, creating a complete diet that allowed their communities to grow and become more settled. Life was no longer solely about following the food, it was about staying in one place and building upon it. Over centuries, this stability sparked a cultural explosion. The simple pit houses dug into the earth evolved into sprawling villages of above-ground masonry. Their artistry flourished beyond baskets into beautifully painted pottery. They studied the movements of the sun and stars, carving precise calendars into rock faces to mark the solstices, ensuring their planting cycles were perfectly aligned with the heavens. This was the foundation of everything to come, a society growing in knowledge, complexity, and ambition, all nurtured from those first fragile seeds of corn. This remarkable cultural foundation of knowledge and stability found its ultimate expression in stone. The journey from those early pit houses to the monumental great houses is a story of architectural ambition on an almost unimaginable scale. The first homes were simple, practical shelters dug several feet into the earth with timber frames and roofs of mud and brush. They were cozy and efficient, perfect for a family. But as communities grew, so did their buildings. Pit houses gave way to rows of single-story rooms built from stone and adobe mortar, creating the first true villages. Then, around the year 900, something extraordinary happened. The Ancestral Puebloans began to build on a scale that would dominate the landscape for centuries. They started constructing what we now call the Great Houses. The most spectacular examples are found in Choco Canyon, massive multi-story complexes containing hundreds of rooms. Pueblo Bonito, the largest, rose 4 and 5 stories high and contained over 600 rooms. Building these structures was a staggering undertaking. It required precise engineering to create stable, load-bearing walls that could support multiple floors. Each stone was carefully shaped and set, creating the distinctive masonry patterns we can still see today. But perhaps the most telling detail is the timber. The great houses required enormous, straight wooden beams for their roofs and upper floors. Yet Choco Canyon itself is a high desert with only small, twisted junipers and piñon pine. So where did all that timber come from? The answer reveals a vast and organized operation. The logs, primarily ponderosa pine and fir, were cut from mountain ranges over 50 miles away. Imagine the effort hauling thousands of these massive beams across rugged terrain without the wheel or draft animals. This was not a haphazard construction project. It was a coordinated, society-wide endeavor that speaks to a powerful, centralized vision. These great houses were more than just apartment buildings. They were the beating heart of a complex civilization, centers for ceremony, trade, and astronomy, their walls aligned with the cycles of the sun and moon. They stand as a permanent testament to what these people could achieve when they worked together. At the heart of this vast network stood Choco Canyon, a place that transformed from a simple settlement into a dazzling metropolis. Think of it not just as a city, but as the spiritual and economic capital of the entire ancestral Puebloan world. Its scale is difficult to grasp even when you are standing right there. The most magnificent structure, Pueblo Bonito, was a colossal D-shaped complex that rose like a stone fortress from the canyon floor. It contained over 600 rooms, a honeycomb of living spaces, storage chambers, and workshops stacked 4 and 5 stories high. Woven throughout this architectural marvel were more than 40 kivas, the circular, partially underground rooms that served as the sacred heart of community life. These kivas were not just buildings, they were portals to the spiritual world, places for ceremony, prayer, and council. The entire layout of Pueblo Bonito was a grand cosmic clock. Its walls were meticulously aligned to capture the sun's rays on the summer and winter solstices, and its architecture marked the complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon. This was a society that built its home in perfect harmony with the heavens. But Choco was more than a ceremonial center, it was a bustling hub of commerce and connection. Exotic goods flowed into the canyon from hundreds of miles away. Seashells from the Pacific coast, macaw feathers from the jungles of Mesoamerica, and turquoise from distant mines were all found within its rooms. This was a place where people gathered, not just to worship, but to trade, to share knowledge, and to reaffirm their place in a vast, interconnected world. The city itself was a testament to their belief that the physical and spiritual realms were one and the same. Yet even the grandeur of Choco Canyon was eventually eclipsed by a new architectural marvel, one that took their mastery of the landscape to dizzying new heights. The ancestral Puebloans began to retreat from the open canyon floors, moving their entire communities into the sides of cliffs. In places like Mesa Verde, they became masters of the vertical world, building entire cities within the shelter of massive natural alcoves. Cliff Palace is the most breathtaking example, a sprawling sandstone city tucked seamlessly under a towering rock overhang. It is a sight that defies logic, a multi-story complex of over 150 rooms and nearly 24 kivas, all clinging to the sheer cliff face. Building here required a different kind of genius. How did they even begin such a project? They constructed intricate scaffolding from timber and used hand and toe holds carved directly into the rock, allowing them to scale the cliffs and haul building materials up from the canyon floor. The buildings themselves were crafted from sandstone blocks, carefully shaped and mortared together, rising several stories high within the protective embrace of the alcove. So why choose such an inaccessible and challenging place to live? The advantages were profound. Defense was an obvious benefit. A single, difficult-to-scale access point made these cities nearly impregnable, a formidable stronghold against any threat. But the cliffs offered more than just security. The massive rock overhangs acted as a giant natural roof, shielding the dwellings from snow, rain, and the scorching summer sun. This provided incredible temperature regulation, keeping the homes cool in the blistering heat and warm during the bitter cold of winter. It was a perfect adaptation, a way to harness the earth itself for comfort and survival. Here, high above the world, an entire civilization thrived in the most improbable of places, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of a challenging environment. High on these cliff ledges and spread across the sun-baked mesas, a vibrant, complex society went about its daily life. This was not a civilization of idle monument builders, but a culture deeply rooted in the demanding rhythms of the earth. Their survival and their spectacular achievements were all made possible by a profound understanding of their arid home. They were masters of dry farming, coaxing life from the desert in ways that still inspire awe. Instead of relying on rivers, they became brilliant harvesters of rain. They constructed intricate grid gardens across the landscape, shallow depressions that trapped every precious drop of moisture. On the slopes, they built low stone walls called check dams, which would slow the flow of water after a storm, allowing it to soak deep into the soil rather than washing it away. They even channeled rain runoff from vast rock slabs directly into their waiting fields. Every single raindrop was a resource to be captured and cherished. This intimate relationship with the land sustained a population that could then turn its attention to art and craft. In their cool, shaded rooms, artisans created objects of both utility and beauty. Potters, often women, coiled long ropes of clay into elegant vessels, then painted them with intricate geometric designs in stark black on a white background. These were not mere decorations, they were symbols of identity and belief, used for storing water, grinding corn, and in sacred ceremonies, and they never forgot their ancient basket-maker roots. Using the tough fibers of the yucca plant, they wove baskets so tight they were waterproof and crafted sturdy, comfortable sandals that allowed them to traverse the rugged canyon trails. From the food they grew to the pots that held it and the shoes they walked in, every aspect of their lives was a testament to skill, patience, and a deep connection to the world around them. This deep connection to the earth was matched only by their profound relationship with the spirit world. For the ancestral Puebloans, the physical and spiritual were inseparable, woven together in the very fabric of their daily lives. The heart of this spiritual practice was the kiva. These circular, subterranean rooms were far more than just architectural features. They were sacred spaces, the center of community and ceremony. To enter a kiva was to descend into a different realm, leaving the everyday world behind. The air inside was cool and still, the only light coming from a small hole in the roof, which also served as the entrance via a ladder. This ladder was deeply symbolic, representing the people's own emergence from the underworld into this, the fourth world. At the very center of the kiva floor was the sipapu, a small, intentional hole in the ground. This was not just a hole, it was the navel of the world, the very portal through which their ancestors had first emerged into existence and through which their spirits could still communicate. It was a constant, physical reminder of their origins and their connection to the generations that came before. Within these powerful spaces, the community would gather for rituals that ensured the continuation of life itself. They prayed for rain, for successful harvests, and for the harmony of the cosmos. The walls of the kiva were often adorned with vivid murals depicting spiritual figures and symbols, creating a portal to another dimension. One of the most recognizable of these figures is Kokopelli, the humpbacked flute player. This whimsical, wandering spirit was a complex character, a symbol of fertility both for the crops and for the people. The music from his flute was said to melt the winter snow and bring the spring rains, and his hunched back was often depicted as a bag of seeds, or perhaps even the songs and stories he carried from village to village. He was a bringer of joy, a trader and a trickster, embodying the hope and unpredictability of life itself. Through these symbols and sacred spaces, the ancestral Puebloans built a rich spiritual life, one that sought to maintain a delicate balance between the human community, the natural world, and the powerful, unseen forces that governed both. But this intricate balance between earth and spirit could not last forever. A shadow was slowly falling across the southwest, a threat that no amount of engineering or prayer could easily stop. The first signs of trouble appeared in the very thing they depended on most, the sky. For generations, their survival was a testament to capturing every drop of water. But what happens when the drops simply stop falling? Scientists have uncovered the grim truth by reading the diaries of the trees themselves. The science of dendrochronology, which studies the patterns in tree rings, reveals a terrifying chapter in the climate's history. Starting around the year 1276, the region was gripped by a relentless period of aridity now known as the Great Drought. This was not just a few dry years, it was a profound, generation-spanning catastrophe. Each narrow tree ring from that era tells the same story: a year of stunted growth, a year of desperate thirst. For a civilization built on dry farming, this was an existential crisis. Their ingenious grid gardens and check dams were designed to maximize minimal rainfall, but they could not create water from nothing. The corn, beans, and squash that formed the bedrock of their diet and their culture would have withered in the fields. Spring after spring, the usual rains failed to arrive. The summer monsoons, which should have delivered life-giving downpours, became weak and unreliable. Reservoirs and springs dried up. You can imagine the growing anxiety as the granaries, once overflowing, began to empty. The very foundation of their society, an agricultural surplus that allowed for artisans, astronomers, and builders, was crumbling away. The land itself was turning against them, and the stage was set for a struggle that would test the very fabric of their world. The relentless drought was only one part of a much larger environmental crisis. For all their ingenuity, the Ancestral Puebloans were facing a problem of their own making, a slow-burning disaster rooted in their greatest achievements. The very act of building their magnificent cities placed an unbearable strain on the land. To raise the colossal great houses of Choco Canyon, they needed an almost unimaginable quantity of timber. Thousands of those massive pine and fir logs were hauled from distant mountain ranges, but what about the wood needed for everyday life in the growing communities surrounding these centers? For heating, for cooking, for building smaller homes, they would have turned to the forests closest to them. Over generations, the local woodlands were steadily cleared. Imagine the landscape slowly changing, the pinon and juniper forests that once held the soil in place thinning out year after year. This deforestation set off a devastating chain reaction. Without the deep root systems of trees and shrubs to anchor it, the topsoil became vulnerable. When the rare, heavy rain finally did fall, there was nothing to stop it. Instead of soaking gently into the ground to nourish crops, the water would have raced across the barren slopes, carrying away the most fertile soil in torrents of mud. This erosion would have scarred the land, carving deep gullies and washing precious nutrients downstream, leaving behind only barren, rocky ground. Their farmland, already struggling under a punishing drought, was now being stripped of its very lifeblood. The environmental foundation was crumbling, and the society built upon it began to fracture under the pressure. The cracks in their world were not only appearing in the parched earth, but in the very bonds that held their society together. As the drought tightened its grip and resources grew scarce, the desperation began to turn inward. The archaeological record, once a story of community and cooperation, starts to reveal a much darker and more violent chapter. For a long time, the popular image of the Ancestral Puebloans was one of a peaceful, harmonious people, but discoveries at several sites paint a grim picture of social collapse. At a place called Cowboy Wash in southwestern Colorado, a gruesome scene was unearthed. In the remains of a pit house, archaeologists found the bodies of 7 individuals. They had not been given a careful burial. The bones showed clear evidence of violent death, including cut marks consistent with butchering. The most chilling detail was found in the cooking pots, where residue tests revealed human myoglobin, a protein only found in heart and muscle tissue. This is the strongest evidence yet of cannibalism. This was not an isolated event. At a site known as Sacred Ridge near present-day Durango, the scale of violence is staggering. The remains of at least 35 people were found, showing signs of extreme trauma. skulls were crushed, bones were broken, and bodies were dismembered. The evidence suggests a single, coordinated attack that wiped out an entire community. The brutality was so intense that it appears the attackers were not just killing their enemies, but utterly annihilating them, perhaps as a message of terror. This is not the kind of warfare seen in heroic battles, but something far more intimate and terrifying. It speaks to a society tearing itself apart, where neighbor turned against neighbor in a brutal struggle for survival. The great houses and cliff dwellings, once symbols of safety and community, may have become fortresses under siege, not just from external enemies, but from the fear and suspicion growing within. Faced with such overwhelming pressures, the ancestral Puebloans made a monumental decision. They began to leave. Over the span of just a few decades, starting around the year 1280, a great migration emptied the entire Four Corners region. This was not a sudden, panicked stampede. The evidence tells a different story, one of a coordinated and deliberate departure. They did not flee their homes in a single night. Instead, the process unfolded over generations, a slow, heartbreaking exodus from the stone cities that had housed their ancestors for centuries. It was a systematic retreat, a community decision to seek a new beginning elsewhere. The way they left their homes is perhaps the most telling detail. Walking through the silent rooms of Cliff Palace or Pueblo Bonito today, you can see the echoes of their final days. In many dwellings, they left behind objects of immense practical and sentimental value. Beautifully painted pots, some still full of stored maize, were placed carefully in the corners. Heavy grinding stones, essential for processing corn and impossible to carry on a long journey, were left neatly on the floor. Jewelry made of turquoise and shell, prized possessions that signified status and connection, was abandoned in the dust. These were not the acts of people running for their lives. This was the behavior of a people who fully intended to come back. They were storing their most cherished belongings, securing their homes for a temporary absence, believing they would one day return to reclaim their lives. That day never came. The drought deepened, the social fabric remained torn, and what began as a strategic relocation became a permanent farewell. They walked away from their architectural marvels, leaving them to the wind and the silence, a haunting monument to a hope that was never fulfilled. Their footsteps did not simply vanish into the desert. The great migration away from the cliff dwellings and canyon cities was not an end, but a redirection, a scattering of seeds to new soil. We can trace their paths through both the silent testimony of archaeology and the living memory of their descendants. The evidence points overwhelmingly to the south and east, a movement toward the life-giving rivers that their ancestral lands so desperately lacked. They traveled to the Little Colorado River Basin and the high mesas of what is now Arizona, places where the Hopi people would establish their enduring villages. Others moved eastward, following the Rio Grande and its tributaries, where a constellation of pueblos would later flourish. This was not a random flight, but a purposeful journey toward water and new opportunities for community. The archaeological record shows a fascinating pattern. In the decades surrounding 1300, the large, centralized villages in the Four Corners region were systematically abandoned. At the very same time, smaller settlements began to appear and grow dramatically along these southern and eastern riverways. You can see the continuity in the artifacts they carried with them, the distinct styles of black-on-white pottery, the techniques of stone masonry, and the sacred architecture of the kiva, all echoing the traditions of their ancestral homeland. These were not invaders arriving in a new land. They were relatives coming home, joining with kin who had already established a foothold there. The migration wove new threads into the existing social fabric, strengthening some communities and founding entirely new ones. This dispersal was the birth of the historic Pueblo tribes. The Hopi, whose name means the peaceful people, trace their clan origins directly to specific ruins in the north. Their oral histories are filled with detailed migration stories, chronicling the journeys of different clans from their original homes to the mesas where they live today. The Zuni people, further to the east, have their own deep ancestral memories of this great movement, and along the Rio Grande, the ancestors of the modern Pueblos of Taos, Picuris, Santo Domingo, and many others, integrated these new arrivals, creating the vibrant and diverse Pueblo world that Spanish explorers would encounter 2 centuries later. The story of the ancestral Puebloans does not end with empty cliff houses. It continues in the living cultures, the languages, the ceremonies, and the very communities that thrive to this day. They did not vanish, they transformed, carrying the wisdom of their ancestors into a new chapter of their long history. The silent stones of the cliff dwellings are not the only keepers of this story. Far to the south, on 3 high mesas in Arizona, the past lives on in the voices and villages of the Hopi people. They are known as Hisatsinam, the Ancient Ones, and they maintain an unbroken cultural thread stretching back to the very architects of the great houses and cliffside cities. Their oral histories are not mere legends but detailed chronicles of clan migrations, describing long journeys from the north to their current home. These stories speak of a previous world, a cycle of existence that ended, prompting their ancestors to embark on a great search for the center of the universe, a place of spiritual balance they call Anasazi. The abandonment of the northern sites is remembered not as a disappearance, but as a necessary closing of one chapter so a new one could begin. This profound connection is woven into the very fabric of Hopi society. Their clan system is a living map of this ancestral journey. Each clan, like the Bear Clan, the Spider Clan, or the Bluebird Clan, carries its own migration story, its own memory of the specific canyon or mesa they emerged from. When a Hopi person introduces themselves, they often state their clan, instantly connecting their identity to a specific place and moment in that ancient history. Their ceremonies are the heartbeat of this continuity. During the intricate rituals performed in the plaza of their villages, dancers call upon the Katsanam, the spirit messengers who bring rain and blessings. The prayers offered are for the same things their ancestors prayed for in the subterranean kivas, for rain to nourish the crops, for harmony in the world, and for the well-being of the people. The Hopi are not simply studying history, they are living it, tending a spiritual flame that was first kindled over 1,000 years ago in the shadow of those magnificent, empty cliffs. The story of the Great Migration also flows down river to the Zuni people and the many Pueblo nations along the Rio Grande. Their thriving communities with distinctive languages and deep-rooted traditions form a vibrant tapestry of cultural survival. While the Hopi tell of journeys from the north, the Zuni have their own powerful oral histories, tracing their origins to the very heart of the ancestral world. They speak of emerging from a place deep underground and embarking on a long, sacred quest for the middle place, the spiritual center of the world, which they found at their current home in western New Mexico. This is not a forgotten legend, but a living memory that informs their identity and their connection to the land. Their language, a unique linguistic isolate unrelated to any of their neighbors, is itself a profound link to the past, a direct echo of the ancient voices that once echoed through the great kivas of Choco Canyon. When you listen to the Zuni language, you are hearing a sound that has endured for more than 1,000 years. Their agricultural practices offer another clear line of continuity. Just like their ancestors, the Zuni and other Pueblo peoples are masters of dry farming, using traditional techniques to grow corn, beans, and squash in an arid environment. They employ grid gardens to capture rainfall and carefully select seeds that have been passed down through countless generations, each one a living heirloom carrying the genetic memory of ancestral fields. The social structure of these communities also reflects the ancient past. They are organized around matrilineal clans, where lineage and inheritance are traced through the mother, a system that likely governed the great houses as well. Leadership is not held by a single powerful chief, but by a council of religious elders who guide the community, ensuring that spiritual and practical life remain in harmony. The kiva remains the sacred center of village life, a direct architectural and spiritual descendant of the circular chambers found in every cliff dwelling. Within these spaces, prayers for rain and for a bountiful harvest continue, just as they did centuries ago. The Zuni and their Pueblo relatives are not separate from the story of the Anasazi. They are its living conclusion. They demonstrate that a civilization is not defined solely by its buildings, but by the enduring strength of its culture, its language, and its people. So where does this leave the mystery? With all these threads of drought, violence, and migration laid bare, the most compelling answer is not a single villain but a cascade of failures. Modern scholars see the disappearance not as a single event, but as a perfect storm, a catastrophic convergence of environmental and social pressures that shattered a civilization. The relentless 24-year Great Drought was the engine of this disaster, but it was the society's own structure that determined its fate. Generations of deforestation and soil erosion had already weakened their agricultural backbone, making them terrifyingly vulnerable when the rains finally failed. You cannot grow a society without a foundation of food. As the granaries emptied, the intricate social contract that bound communities together began to fray. The evidence of cannibalism and mass violence at places like Sacred Ridge suggests that when the old rules of cooperation broke down, they gave way to sheer desperation and terror. This was likely not a war with outsiders, but a brutal internal conflict, a civil war fought over the last remaining resources. It is easy to imagine how faith in the old ways would have crumbled. The priests and elders who had always been able to call upon the spirits for rain were now presiding over a deepening crisis. Their prayers went unanswered, their celestial calendars marking only the passage of more dry, hopeless years. This could have sparked a profound religious crisis, a loss of faith in the spiritual leaders and the ceremonies that had once guaranteed the world's balance. When the environment, the social order, and the spiritual foundation all fail at once, what is left to hold a people together? The Great Migration was not an admission of defeat, but a pragmatic, collective decision to seek a new equilibrium. They chose to abandon the stone monuments of their past in order to preserve the living core of their culture, their families, and their beliefs. They traded grandeur for survival, ensuring their story would continue, not in silent stone, but in the living voices of their descendants. Perhaps the most disturbing question raised by this era of turmoil is whether starvation ever crossed a final, unthinkable line. The theory of cannibalism among the ancestral Puebloans is one of archaeology's most heated debates, a controversy that forces us to confront the absolute extremes of human desperation. The primary evidence comes from the meticulous work of physical anthropologists like Christy Turner, who studied bone assemblages from sites like Cowboy Wash. The clues they uncovered are chillingly specific. On human bones, they identified cut marks that mirror those found on animal bones processed for food. These are not the deep gashes of battle, but precise, systematic incisions made at the joints, the kind used to dismember a body. Another telltale sign is something called pot polish. When fresh bone is stirred in a clay pot, the abrasive material of the pottery leaves a distinctive, fine sheen on the bone's surface, a gloss that is almost impossible to create through any other means. Then there is the evidence of burning. Bones found in ancient hearths show signs of having been exposed to direct fire consistent with roasting. For Turner and his supporters, this combination of evidence, the butchering marks, the pot polish, the burning, pointed to one grim conclusion, that in some instances people resorted to consuming other human beings. This was not presented as a widespread cultural practice, but as a horrific act of survival in the face of catastrophic famine and social breakdown. The theory suggests that when all other sources of food vanished and society's rules shattered, the unthinkable became a temporary, terrifying reality. Yet many scholars and modern Pueblo people strongly challenge this interpretation. They argue that the same physical evidence could point to something entirely different, rooted not in hunger but in fear and spiritual belief. The counter-argument proposes that this violence was a form of ritualistic execution directed at individuals believed to be witches. In many cultures, including some Pueblo traditions, the destruction of a witch involved the complete annihilation of their body to prevent their malevolent spirit from returning. This could explain the systematic dismemberment and the burning, acts meant to utterly destroy a dangerous spiritual presence, not to harvest a meal. The pot polish, in this view, might result from boiling body parts in a ritual of purification or desecration, a symbolic act far removed from nourishment. This debate is about more than just interpreting ancient bones. It strikes at the heart of how we understand this civilization's collapse. Were they reduced to the most basic animal instinct for survival, or were they caught in a different kind of terror, a spiritual war against perceived evil from within? The bones themselves hold the physical facts of violence, but the true story of what happened in those dark, final days remains locked in silence, a grim testament to a world coming undone. Beyond the stone walls of the great houses lay another, even more expansive mystery etched into the earth itself. The Ancestral Puebloans built a network of roads that reached far beyond Choco Canyon, a web of straight lines carved across the rugged landscape. These were not meandering trails formed by wandering feet. They were engineered highways, some over 30 miles long, and they cut through the desert with a startling, unwavering purpose. Imagine standing at the edge of one of these great roads. It is not a narrow path, but a cleared avenue up to 30 feet wide, bordered by low earthen berms or lines of stone. It runs perfectly straight, disappearing over the horizon, defying hills and small valleys in its path. When a slope was too steep, they carved stone stairways into the bedrock. When a ravine blocked the way, they built ramps and earthen mounds to maintain their direct course. This was an immense, coordinated effort, a project that must have required as much communal will as the construction of the great houses themselves. So what was the purpose of this vast network? Why go to such incredible lengths to build roads that are so rigidly straight? The most practical theory is that they were the trade routes of their time, physical highways for moving goods across great distances. We know that exotic items like macaw feathers, seashells, and turquoise flowed into Choco. These wide, clear roads would have allowed processions of traders and porters to carry these valuable commodities efficiently, connecting the canyon to outlying communities dozens of miles away. Yet the sheer, almost obsessive straightness of the roads suggests a purpose far beyond simple commerce. Many researchers believe they were also symbolic pathways, sacred lines connecting the spiritual center of Choco to the surrounding mountains, mesas, and springs that held deep religious significance. They may have been pilgrimage routes walked by people traveling to the canyon for great ceremonies, their journey itself a form of prayer, a physical movement along a spiritual line of power. The roads might not have been just for the living either. Some scholars propose they were seen as the routes for souls, pathways for the spirits of the dead to travel back to the underworld. This duality makes the Chacon roads so fascinating. They were simultaneously practical infrastructure and profound spiritual monuments, a physical expression of a world where the journey and the destination, the earthly and the divine, were one and the same. Today, the full extent of this network is still being uncovered. From the ground, many of these roads are now just faint traces, visible only as subtle discolorations in the soil or as straight lines of desert vegetation. But from the sky, with the aid of LiDAR technology, their true scale is being revealed. LiDAR uses laser pulses to map the ground surface, digitally stripping away the modern vegetation to expose the ancient features beneath. This high-tech eye in the sky is discovering new road segments and connections, showing us that this network was even more extensive and complex than we ever imagined. Each new discovery deepens the enigma, reminding us that the true reach of Choco Canyon extended far beyond its stone walls, along these mysterious straight lines that still point toward the horizon. This astronomical genius was carved in stone high atop a lonely butte. On the summit of Fajada but in Choco Canyon, 3 massive stone slabs lean against the cliff face. For most of the year, they cast ordinary, shifting shadows, but on the summer solstice, something magical happens. As the sun reaches its highest point in the sky, a sliver of light pierces the gap between the slabs. This dagger of sunlight, sharp and brilliant, strikes directly through the center of a large, carved spiral petroglyph. It is not a random act of nature, but a perfect, predictable alignment. On the winter solstice, 2 daggers of light perfectly bracket the same spiral, and during the spring and fall equinoxes, a single shaft of light cuts the spiral directly in half. This is the sun dagger, one of the world's most sophisticated ancient calendars. It transformed a sunbeam into a cosmic clock. For the people of Choco, this was far more than a clever observation. It was the heartbeat of their entire civilization. The solstice markers told them precisely when to plant their crops, when to expect the summer rains, and when to harvest. Their survival in that harsh desert depended on perfect timing, and the sun dagger provided it with absolute certainty, but its purpose went deeper than agriculture. The solstices and equinoxes were powerful spiritual events, moments when the veil between worlds was believed to be thinnest. The dramatic light show on Fajada but would have signaled the time for the most important ceremonies of the year. Priests and elders would have watched for this sign, then descended to the great kivas below to begin the rituals that ensured the sun would continue its journey, that the seasons would turn, and that balance would be restored to the world. This single petroglyph, activated by the sun, wove together time, survival, and faith, proving that for the ancestral Puebloans, watching the sky was as essential as tending the earth. These silent stone cities were far from isolated. The ancestral Puebloans were the masterminds of a vast economic network, with Choco Canyon at its very heart. They became the undisputed epicenter of the turquoise trade for the entire Southwest. In the arid mountains to the west, they operated massive turquoise mines, like those at Cerrillos, New Mexico, where they excavated tons of the precious blue-green stone using nothing more than stone tools and fire. Back in the great houses, skilled artisans transformed these rough chunks into objects of breathtaking beauty. They crafted intricate pendants, delicate beads, and complex mosaics, their workmanship so fine it is still admired today. This was not just personal adornment, it was a form of stored wealth and a powerful spiritual medium, believed to hold the essence of water and sky. This locally sourced treasure became their ticket to a wider world. The proof of their far-reaching connections lies in the most unexpected of finds, buried deep within the rooms of Pueblo Bonito. Archaeologists have unearthed the complete skeletons of scarlet macaws, their brilliant red and blue feathers still vivid after 1,000 years. These are not native birds, they are tropical parrots from the rainforests of Mesoamerica, a staggering 1,500-mile journey to the south. Transporting these fragile, living birds across such a vast and rugged distance would have been an incredible feat, a testament to the importance of this trade. They were likely prized for their vibrant feathers, used in sacred ceremonies and as symbols of high status. Alongside the macaw remains, explorers found another exotic import, small, finely crafted copper bells. The technology for metallurgy did not exist in the Southwest at this time. These bells were made in the advanced workshops of West Mexico. Imagine the scene, a Chacon priest draped in turquoise, shaking a copper bell whose chime had traveled farther than most people would in a lifetime. These objects were more than mere luxuries. They were the physical evidence of a web of ideas, rituals, and relationships that stretched across a continent. The great houses were not just local ceremonial centers, they were cosmopolitan hubs connected to the great civilizations of their age. This shift in sacred architecture tells a profound story of social transformation. The great kivas of Choco Canyon were monuments to communal power, enormous circular chambers sunk deep into the earth, capable of holding hundreds of people for ceremonies directed by a powerful few. These were the cathedrals of their time, where a centralized religious authority likely orchestrated rituals that unified the entire region. Imagine the scene inside during a solstice ceremony, the air thick with incense and chant, a single voice or a small group of priests leading a massive, rapt audience. This was religion on a grand, institutional scale. But as people moved into the cliff dwellings centuries later, the architectural blueprint of their spiritual life changed dramatically. In places like Cliff Palace, you do not find one or two great kivas. Instead, you discover a constellation of smaller, more intimate kivas, sometimes one for every few family rooms. This was not a loss of faith, but a fundamental reorganization of it. Power seems to have diffused, moving from a centralized priesthood to individual clan leaders or family elders. Each small kiva could have served a specific kin group, a place for more personal rites and clan-specific traditions. The very act of worship became more localized, more intimate. This evolution from a few large centers to many small ones hints at a massive societal shift. The top-down hierarchical model that built the great houses may have fractured under the strains of drought and social unrest. In its place, a more resilient, clan-based society emerged, one that valued local control and family autonomy over centralized authority. The kiva, the eternal heart of their spiritual world, had adapted, reflecting a people who were decentralizing their society to survive in a new, more challenging world. Ancient mysteries are slowly giving up their secrets, not to shovels and brushes alone, but to the silent gaze of lasers from the sky. Modern archaeology is undergoing a radical transformation, using powerful new tools to peer through time itself. One of the most revolutionary is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine an airplane flying over a dense, overgrown landscape, firing millions of laser pulses toward the ground. These pulses pierce the forest canopy, bouncing off the solid earth below. By measuring the time it takes for each laser to return, a computer can construct an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the ground surface, digitally stripping away every single tree and bush. What remains is the ghost of the ancient landscape. In the southwest, LiDAR has been a revelation. It has confirmed the astonishing straightness and extent of the Chacon road system, revealing segments that were completely invisible from the ground. But its power goes far beyond just confirming old theories. It is discovering entirely new sites, small hamlets and isolated structures hidden for centuries under thick pinon and juniper forests. These discoveries are forcing us to redraw the map of the ancestral Puebloan world. We are learning that their settlements were more numerous and spread across a much wider area than we ever knew. The empty spaces on our maps are filling in, revealing a civilization that was even more expansive and interconnected than the grandest cliff dwellings suggested. While LiDAR maps the shape of their world, another technology is tracing the bloodlines of the people themselves. DNA analysis is providing a biological witness to the Great Migration. Scientists can now extract genetic material from ancient bones and teeth found in the abandoned sites of the Four Corners. This ancient DNA acts as a unique fingerprint, a genetic signature from the deep past. The critical step is comparing this ancient DNA to the genetic profiles of modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi and Zuni. The results have been stunningly clear. The DNA evidence shows an unbroken biological thread connecting the people who built and abandoned Mesa Verde and Choco Canyon directly to the people living in the Pueblos of today. This is not just a cultural connection, it is a genealogical one. The genetic data powerfully supports the oral histories that have been passed down for generations. It confirms that the migration was a real, physical movement of populations from the north to the south and east. We can now see the ghostly outlines of their journey, not just in pottery styles and architectural echoes, but in the very cells of their living descendants. These two technologies, one mapping the land and the other mapping the people, are weaving together a story that is both scientifically rigorous and deeply human. They are closing the circle, proving that the story of the ancestral Puebloans does not end with empty ruins, but continues in the vibrant, living communities that still honor their ancient past. For centuries, the silent city slept, known only to the descendants of their builders and a few local Navajo families. Their peace was shattered in the late 1800s by the arrival of new strangers. Cowboys and prospectors pushing into the remote canyons of the Southwest began to stumble upon these incredible stone structures tucked away in the cliffs. At first, they were seen as little more than curiosities, or worse, as treasure troves waiting to be plundered. One name stands out in this era of discovery and exploitation: Richard Wetherill. In December of 1888, while searching for lost cattle on the snowy mesa tops, Wetherill and his brother-in-law peered over a canyon ledge and saw Cliff Palace for the first time. It was a moment of pure astonishment. They saw a city of unparalleled scale, a labyrinth of towers and rooms perfectly preserved under the vast sandstone overhang. Wetherill was captivated, and he would go on to discover many more major sites, including Spruce Tree House and Balcony House, but his fascination had a dark side. He and others like him were not trained archaeologists, they were ranchers and adventurers. They saw the pottery, the tools, and the burial goods not as pieces of a cultural story, but as artifacts to be collected and sold. They would spend weeks digging through the ancient refuse, their methods destructive and hurried, focused solely on finding intact, marketable objects. The silent rooms, undisturbed for 600 years, were suddenly filled with the sounds of shovels and the clatter of priceless pottery being hauled away in wagons. This was the age of the pot hunter, and the cultural heritage of the ancestral Puebloans was being stripped away piece by piece to decorate mantles back east. But the sheer magnificence of these sites also sparked a different kind of reaction, one of awe and a budding sense of national responsibility. A growing number of people began to see the ruins not as a private treasure hunt, but as a public treasure belonging to all Americans. They were horrified by the rampant looting and the damage being done. This public outcry, led by photographers, journalists, and a new generation of scholars, created a powerful movement for preservation. Their efforts culminated in one of the most significant conservation victories in American history. On June 29, 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed a bill establishing Mesa Verde National Park. It was the first national park of its kind, created specifically to protect the works of humanity. Rangers now stood guard where looters once roamed freely. The establishment of the park marked a profound shift, a national commitment to protecting these places not for what could be taken from them, but for the irreplaceable story they held within their stones. The silent stones of Mesa Verde hold a warning that echoes across the centuries. The ancestral Puebloans were masters of adaptation, yet they encountered a set of environmental challenges that even their ingenuity could not overcome. Their story is far more than a historical mystery. It is a stark and powerful case study for our own time. They faced a profound climate shift, a great drought that stretched for generations, testing the very limits of their survival. Today, our global civilization confronts a climate crisis of our own making, with rising temperatures, intensifying weather patterns, and sea levels that threaten coastal cities. The parallel is not in the specific events, but in the underlying dynamic, a complex society pushing against the boundaries of its environmental support system. Just as their deforestation and soil erosion weaken the land's ability to sustain them, our own industrial practices and resource consumption are straining the planet's life support systems. The question their disappearance forces us to ask is a deeply unsettling one. What happens when a society, no matter how advanced or culturally rich, fails to live in balance with the world that nourishes it? Their civilization did not collapse in a single day. It was a slow unraveling, a series of interconnected failures where a changing climate exposed and amplified every social and ecological vulnerability. We can see a similar pattern unfolding today where climate-related disasters, from catastrophic wildfires to unprecedented floods, are exacerbating social inequalities, disrupting supply chains, and fueling political instability. The Ancestral Puebloans experience demonstrates that environmental change is rarely just an environmental problem. It is a catalyst that can shatter the social contract, turning neighbor against neighbor in a desperate competition for dwindling resources. Their ultimate lesson is one of resilience, but not in the way we might think. Their resilience was not found in stubbornly clinging to their magnificent stone cities. True resilience was shown in their ability to make a monumental, collective decision to leave, to migrate and reorganize their society in a new form. They chose cultural survival over geographical permanence. For us, the equivalent is not about abandoning our cities, but about having the collective wisdom to transform our energy systems, our agricultural practices, and our economic models before the choice is made for us. Their legacy, preserved in the living Pueblo cultures, proves that a civilization's greatest achievement is not the grandeur of its buildings, but the adaptability of its people. Their story is a humbling reminder from the deep past, a whisper on the desert wind urging us to listen and to learn. So the mystery is far from closed. Even with all the evidence we have gathered, fundamental questions about this civilization continue to challenge archaeologists. What, for instance, was the true core purpose of Choco Canyon? We know it was a ceremonial hub and a trade center, but was it something more? Some researchers now propose it was less a permanent city and more of a seasonal pilgrimage site, a kind of ancient Mecca that swelled with people during solstice ceremonies and then emptied out again. This would explain the staggering number of rooms alongside evidence that many were not continuously lived in. The exact nature of the social collapse also remains hotly debated. We see the violence and the drought, but what was the final trigger? Was it a single catastrophic event, or was it a slow, grinding exhaustion of both the land and the human spirit? Did a new, more aggressive ideology sweep through the region, turning communities against each other and the old priestly class? These are the puzzles that drive modern science. Right now, in canyons and on mesas across the Southwest, new excavations are underway. Archaeologists are using ground-penetrating radar to peer into unexcavated sections of great houses, hoping to find untouched rooms that could reveal clues about daily life in those final decades. In laboratories, scientists are conducting more refined chemical analysis on pottery and human remains, tracing migration patterns with a precision that was impossible just a generation ago. Each new shard of pottery, each newly mapped road, each genetic sample adds another piece to this immense ancient puzzle, reminding us that the story of the Ancestral Puebloans is still being written, one careful discovery at a time. The silent cities of the cliff walls are a testament to a perfect storm. A generation-spanning drought starved the land, while the very act of building their society had, over centuries, stripped the soil and strained their resources. As the environment failed, the social fabric tore, turning communities inward in desperation and violence. This was not one single disaster, but a cascade of crises that made their homeland unsustainable. Yet the true end of this story is not disappearance, but transformation. They made the conscious, collective choice to walk away from their stone marvels, migrating toward new rivers and new futures. Their legacy was never meant to be found in empty rooms, but in the living voices, the enduring ceremonies, and the thriving communities of the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo people. The mystery of the Ancestral Puebloans invites us to look beyond the ruins to the resilience of the human spirit. What do you believe was the most compelling factor in their decision to leave? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you ever stand in the shadow of those great cliff dwellings, remember to listen for the echoes of the past and explore with the respect and wonder that such a profound story deserves.